March 1945. As the British Freikorps travelled from Dresden to the Eastern Front, they saw the shattered cities and exhausted soldiers of the defeated Third Reich. Even the die-hard Nazis in the unit now realised that they'd chosen the wrong side. The British Freikorps' last stand took place here, outside the village of Krusov on the River Oder.
Now here we're standing just about 2 kilometres to the west of the River Oder, and the Russians built up an enormous strength just on the other side of the river. Something like 2 million men were poised ready to descend on Berlin with thousands of tanks. By now, the Germans were completely desperate for troops. Their armies were shattered. They were conscripting 14-year-old boys from the Hitler Youth, giving them quick training in using a rifle, sending them into combat. They were getting old men, they were amputees, and right at the bottom of the barrel is the British Freikorps.
The beleaguered men of the 3rd Germanic Panzer Corps were shocked to discover that their desperately needed reinforcements were British.
They were right up forward, about as far forward as German troops were, observing the Russians on the other side of the river there, and the British Freikorps guys did say we could see the Russians, we could see them, you know, preparing positions, doing all the rest. They were under mortar fire for the first 10 days, so they were certainly under fire.
After a month on the front line, the British Freikorps were sent back to help evacuate the terrified civilians. It was a lucky escape.
When they did eventually attack, it was one of the biggest artillery barrages that's ever been witnessed in the history of the world.
The British Freikorps' German comrades were obliterated and the Russians swept into Berlin. The British traitors fled west and, ditching their Nazi uniforms, mingled with Allied prisoners of war who were now being liberated.
Most of them had kept British POW uniforms, which they had tucked in the bottom of their rucksacks, and they whipped these out and put them on, and they were passing themselves off as being normal British prisoners who'd escaped west.
But for the guilty renegades, the day of reckoning was at hand. A special MI5 squad interrogated the captured men and pieced together the whole story of the British SS unit. Some protested that they'd only joined it as an escape attempt. But others showed no remorse for their actions. A series of prosecutions and courts-martial followed. Thomas Cooper, who'd boasted to his comrades that he'd killed 80 Jewish women and children in a single day, was sentenced to death, later commuted to life imprisonment. Frank Wood, who never gave up his Nazi beliefs, was given life. Most of the others received shorter prison sentences. But in Australia, where the thousands who gave their lives in World War II are commemorated, Robert Chipchase was never charged, and today receives a war pension from the government.
We were investigated naturally by the security, and we came out. And don't worry, we investigated.
And were you charged at all with aiding the enemy?
I don't wish to talk about it. No, never tried.
So
I'm sorry.
So you get your war pension now and everything.
No more. Oh yes, that's all. No more.
Bye-bye. Thanks.
This is not the original letter.
David Greenhoff's father, John Wilson, was sentenced to 10 years. He wrote from prison to David's mother.
I was in Germany. My intentions were still the same. I joined a corps called the British Freikorps. I suppose you'll know all about that now. I had a smashing time. You know me. He was obviously a bit of a lad. And the more I read about him, I thought, well, look at it this way. Here's an event in which millions of people died. Many of them not only in the battlefield, but in circumstances, disgusting and vile circumstances, tortured to death, starved to death, beaten to death. And here was a man who managed to spend most of the war swanning around Berlin, getting a grip of Norwegian maidens and having a wonderful time. I know it doesn't sound very moral, but to me he doesn't seem to have done very much harm either.
And the man who dreamed up the whole idea of a British Nazi Legion, John Amory, faced the ultimate penalty. He laughed as he was found guilty of high treason, and on December the 19th, 1945, at Wandsworth Prison, he was executed. Amory's grand vision had proved a spectacular failure. Despite all their efforts, Hitler and the SS had fundamentally misunderstood the British character.
As I understand it, in the national character, there's a lot of pig-headedness. Some people call it bloody ignorance, right? And some people say common decency. If I had joined the Free Corps, I would never come back here. I've been ashamed to.
We have to remember that there were something like 160,000 British soldiers held prisoner by the Germans, of whom maybe 100, 150 collaborated in an active way. So I think that does say a lot for the character of the British soldiers of the Second World War. That we were the ones with the integrity and the sort of honour to stand up against Nazism. And I think, generally speaking, that is an accurate picture of the British approach to fighting the Second World War. But nonetheless, there was a dark side. It should act as a kind of warning marker, a warning from history, if you like, that British people don't always act honourably.
Well, warships played a huge role in the outcome of the Second